The Daily Telegraph, please. Ta. Course, darn me. Wars. Crime. Disease. Ugly power-mad rulers. Dreadful new weapons and nasty tortures for kids. Like exams. And broccoli. Isn't the news horrible? Well, I've got good news for you. It's always been like that. If you think today's Daily Telegraph is full of horrible news, you should have seen last week's, last year's, last century's. I'm Terry Deary, and I've collected the disgusting parts of the past into my books, Horrible Histories. And they're all about how horrible life used to be. Wars, disease, crazed kings, even nastier vegetables, and most horrible of all, people. You wouldn't believe the people in the past could be just as horrible as people in today's news. But you'd better believe it, because these stories are true history. Horrible Histories with me, Terry Deary. News has never been so nasty. (1939) In the beginning. It's the 30th of September 1939. Germany invades Poland and peacefully shares it with the Russians. No one asked the Poles, of course. Britain and France say they'll fight for little Poland's freedom, and that means war. Very few people had television in those days, but 40 million people of Britain were glued to their radio sets as the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, made an announcement. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that, unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany. No sooner had he made that speech than an air raid warning siren sounded. Mr. Chamberlain was rushed down to a shelter in the basement of the BBC. You can just imagine how upset he must have been as they shut the steel door to the bomb-proof studio. And blast that Hitler and his Nazi party. Nasty party, I call it. Same thing. Anyway, they took over power in Germany, they took over in Czechoslovakia, they took over Austria, and now they've taken over Poland. Well, we told them to get out. They refused. So we've declared war on the rotters, and we're jolly well going to throw the blighters out. Of course, it's just 20 years since the last war, and I'm sorry about that, but that nasty German leader, Mr. Hitler, has to be stopped. And that nasty Mr. Mussolini in Italy, they're all in it together. Somebody has to stop them. It has to be us. Us and our French friends. And our magnificent empire, the Australians, Canadians, Indians, fine chaps anyway. I'll have to put that Winston Churchill chap in charge of the Royal Navy. But it's my job he's after, you know. He wants to be Prime Minister, you know. He's after my job, the bounder. Would you believe it? The all clear, a false alarm. The first German air raid of World War II never happened. Let's get back upstairs. Oh dear. That will never do. We were running around like headless chickens just because of an air raid siren. It doesn't look very good, does it? Makes us look a bit silly, really. Still, it shows we're ready for war. Oh yes, we're ready. But was Britain really ready? What do you think? Dad's Balmy Army. In Britain in 1940, the people were worried about a German invasion from the sea and from the air. The brave Brits started to arm themselves with shotguns and any weapons they could lay their hands on. The government decided it would be better to organise those fighting folk into a proper army, and they were known, at first, as the Local Defence Volunteers, the LDV. At first, these untrained men were a bit of a joke. They weren't given proper weapons, they just armed themselves with anything that could kill. One man said, "We were sent to defend a factory with broom handles. I pinched a knife from Mum's kitchen and tied it to the top. One 14-year-old boy took along a bow and arrow. Others took along a nice heavy golf club." The government said the Home Guard soldiers had to be aged between 17 and 65, but boys as young as 14 joined, and some old soldiers from the First World War lied about their age and were over 80 years old. No wonder they got the nickname Dad's Army. Dad's Army were keen. It was great that they felt they were doing something to help, but sometimes they were too keen and too clumsy. Then they became Dad's disasters. The stories they could tell. Us Home Guard soldiers were worried about how to spot a German. We were warned an enemy paratrooper might be disguised as a nun, a vicar, or even a woman carrying a baby. The daftest idea for uncovering a spy was to shout, "Heil Hitler!" and the German wouldn't be able to stop himself from raising his arm in salute. Then you shoot him. Home Guards were given sticky bombs, a bit like a toffee apple on a stick. The idea was that you'd run up to an enemy tank and slap the goo-covered bomb on the side. But many tried to throw the bombs, the sticks came loose, and the bombs fell at their feet. Oops! 768 Home Guard members were accidentally killed during the Second World War, and their families were just as much at risk. A Home Guard soldier was cleaning his rifle on the kitchen table and forgot there was a bullet in the firing chamber. He pulled the trigger. The gun went off and killed his wife. Early in the war, Home Guard soldiers seemed to believe that anyone landing by parachute must be a German. One brave RAF pilot, James Nicholson, was hit by cannon fire from a German fighter. His foot was smashed and he was on fire. He stuck to his task and shot down the enemy plane before parachuting clear. As he drifted down, wounded and burning, some young Home Guards began blasting at him with shotguns. He screamed at them to stop, but they were too excited to listen. Somehow he survived, but was more injured by his Home Guard colleagues than by the enemy attack. James Nicholson became the only Second World War fighter pilot to get the top medal, the Victoria Cross, for his action that day. His Home Guard attackers didn't get medals. Mind, it wasn't just the Home Guard that panicked a bit. An old woman locked a man from the electricity board in a cupboard because he had a little moustache like Hitler. During the Second World War, the Home Guard killed 50 innocent Brits. There was one story that has never been forgotten. An old soldier remembered it like this. I have to admit, I killed one all that time ago. Oh, not on purpose, of course. I was sent to guard the local aircraft factory one night. It was getting dark, and we were all a bit jumpy. There were new aircraft being tested there, so of course there were rumours that the Germans were going to land with bicycles and spy on them. Imagine how I felt when I saw this young chap cycle along the lane. I put a bullet in my rifle and stepped out into the lane just as he went past me. "Stop!" I cried, but he cycled on. "Stop, or I'll shoot! I'll shoot!" He ignored me. I decided to wreck the bike. I fired at the back wheel. Even if he was a German spy, I didn't want to kill him. But the bullet hit the road and bounced up. It hit the young man in the back. By the time I got to him, he was dead. I didn't know whether to be pleased I'd killed a German or shocked I'd killed a young man. It was the next day, they told me. They said the lad was called Alan Chadwick from a nearby school. He enjoyed going down to the local aircraft factory after school to watch the new planes being tested. Oh, why didn't the lad stop when I called to him, I asked. Because he was deaf, they told me. Because he was deaf. Alan was only 17 years old. Same age as me. Same age as me. (1940) On the 10th of May 1940, the Brits made Winston Churchill their Prime Minister, and he says, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat." And the blood and tears of millions of others too, of course. On the same day, Churchill said that it's the blood and tears of the Belgians and Dutch that are being spilled as Germany invades them. In this year, the Battle of Britain is fought in the skies over England between the German and the British Air Forces. And British cities suffer bombing. It's known as the Blitz. In June, the Brit armies in France had driven back to the beaches at Dunkirk. Kind Mr. Hitler stops the German army from massacring them. They escape, and Mr. Churchill says, "We shall not flag nor fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France and on the seas and oceans. We shall fight in the air. We shall defend our island whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches, landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender." Tough talk for tough times. And in 1940, food is rationed, as everyone is only allowed so much every week, and there are some foods you can't get at all. One way to win a war is to starve the enemy to defeat, cut off the food supplies. Of course, the enemy is trying to do the same to you and your people at the same time. Britain had to bring a lot of her food from across the sea, so the German submarines set out to sink the food ships. The Brits suffered. The German people suffered even worse hardships than the British. So if you can't eat what you want, eat whatever you can get. The US Army gave its soldiers a book with this advice. Let's have a look. The Blue Jackets Handbook, page 21, Survival. When you're far from base and your rations are low, you can stay alive by turning to Mother Nature. Remember, all animals are good to eat. Be careful about eating poisonous snakes. Maggots make good food. Grasshoppers are tasty, but pull the legs and wings off before eating them. Do not eat caterpillars. Hey, isn't history amazing? That last piece of advice is 60 years old, but it's still useful today. Next time you're in a cabbage patch and feeling peckish, remember not to eat the caterpillars. With a little digging, you could find a few juicy worms. Foul food. German bombs weren't the only horrors that Brits faced during the war, as this true story illustrates. "Excuse me, waiter. May I see the manager?" the young man said. "Yes, sir. Nothing wrong, is there, sir?" the worried waiter asked. "A small complaint," the young man said with a grim smile. The waiter shrugged, waddled through the door and returned a minute later with the manager. The manager forced a smile onto his wet lips and twisted his hands nervously. "A problem, sir?" he whined. "I'm a medical student," the young man said. "Oh, I see, sir," the manager said, but his blank face said that he didn't understand at all. Today I'm actually taking an examination. Oh, the best of luck, sir. The student ignored the comment and went on, and for weeks I've been cutting up dead animals to practice my skills. The manager's eyes widened. Could you keep your voice down a little, sir? I think that sort of talk might upset the customers. The student raised his voice instead. We take animals that have been killed in the bombing, mainly dogs and cats. In fact, I'm quite an expert on cats. Oh, yes, I'm sure, the manager muttered, and his face turned as pale as the potato on the plate. So, when I come in here and order stewed rabbit, I'm a little shocked to find that you are serving me stewed cat. There was a clattering of chairs as the diners rose to their feet. Some began muttering angrily, some looking in horror at their empty plates. Some made a dash for the toilets. Oh, perhaps the chef made a mistake, the man whined and rubbed his hand over his greasy hair. The medical student rose to his feet and glared at the manager. The only mistake you made was to try to serve a dead cat to a medical student. I hope the police close you down, he said, as he strode out of the door and was followed by a charge of customers. The cat was already dead, the manager cried after him. They were dead before we cooked them. The customers just ran faster. The restaurant was fined, but allowed to stay open for business and went on to be very successful. (1941). Unmarried women can be called up to join the armed forces of Britain or directed to work in factories or on the land, but the government refuses to let women have guns. They can repair aircraft and roads, catch rats, make bombs or dig in the fields, but they can't be let loose with a pistol. And clothes are now rationed, and in America, President Roosevelt brings the United States into the war, which cheers up the blitzed Brits a bit. The Americans bring lots of new tanks and planes and guns to fight with, and lots of new chewing gum for the kids to stick to teacher's chair. Did you know? In 1941, an Italian newspaper reported that the bombing of Scotland was so heavy, a famous creature was killed by a direct hit. Can you imagine an Italian pilot boasting about that? Hey, we bombed to Glasgow, we bombed to Edinburgh, and then we bombed the Loch of the Ness, and we killed the monster. Was it Messi? No, it was Nessie. In 1941, German planes are bombing London, while British planes hit dozens of German cities. Women and children are now in the front line of war, and so are animals, who didn't start the war. See, in 1941, Hitler invades Russia. Hitler's made some big mistakes, but this is probably the biggest. The Soviets aren't going to give up as easily as some. But at first, the Germans take a lot of Russian prisoners, far too many to feed, and that's where those animals come in. See, Russian prisoners in Germany were always hungry. It was a real treat for them to catch a stray dog and eat it. The dogs are hard to catch. They didn't want to end up as dog meat. The starving Soviets begged their German guards to shoot the dogs for them. The guards didn't mind because they thought the dogs were pests, and they made good target practice. When a dog was hit, the hungry prisoners went crazy. A guard remembered. When a dog fell, the prisoners would fall on it and tear it apart with their bare hands before it was quite dead. They'd stuff the heart, liver and lungs into their pockets to be eaten later. Then they'd light a fire and skewer pieces of dog meat on splinters of wood and roast it. There were always fights over the largest pieces. Bleak blackout. The Brits were forced to suffer blackout. No lights were to be shown at night. Air raid wardens went round checking and crying, "Put that light out!" What the blackout did was cause an awful lot of problems for the people on the ground. Special advisors went around teaching people how the blackout worked. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of Puddlewick, thank you for coming along to All Saints tonight. I do not wish to frighten anyone, but we are in terrible danger. You all know the blackout laws. Street lights are covered in masks, so only a pinpoint of light can be seen beneath them. That's to stop you walking into them. Cars too must have their headlamps masked, as they can't see where they are going and the pedestrians can't see them. As a result, there have been a huge increase in the number of deaths on the roads. And, as you know, there is no smoking allowed in the street. Only last week, a man was fined for lighting a cigarette in the street during an air raid. Now, I don't want to frighten anyone, but there are some people out there who take advantage of the dark streets to commit crimes. Some Cambridge children thought it funny to hide in the graveyard and jump out at people waiting at the bus stop. They were thrashed. And in Peckham, 2 youths even went so far as to paint skeletons on black sheets in luminous paint to terrify passers-by. Worst of all was the blackout ripper, murderer. But don't worry, Jack the Ripper was never caught 50 years ago. Luckily, the blackout ripper was carrying a gas mask and dropped it after his last crime. It had his name inside and the police were able to trace him. He's to be hanged next week. And now it seems the blackout itself has been causing problems. I'm here tonight to offer a few suggestions. Puddlewick Council has been asked to paint white lines along the edge of every pavement so you don't step into the road and get knocked over by one of those blacked out cars. Everyone is advised to walk on the left of the pavement so they don't collide with people going the other way. Ladies who wear dark coats should put white material inside them, then in really dark places turn them inside out so the white shows. As for the gentlemen, the government recommends that you wear your white shirt tail hanging out at the back of your trousers so you can be seen. And finally, for any farmers in the audience here, think about your black cows. If you have to drive them across the road every night to milk them, then the government is suggesting that you paint white stripes on the black cows. They reckon the blackout didn't really work anyway. Cities gave off a glow at night, and all the curtains and dark streets didn't stop the enemy bombers finding their targets. But farmers really were told to paint black cows with white stripes. And more kids than usual were killed by cars in the blackout years, even though there were very few cars on the road. Groovy gas masks. Of course, the suffering children didn't just have to worry about bombs, they also had to be worried about being killed with poison gas. There were posters in the street that would scare the pants off you. They said, "It's your duty to yourself, your family, and your country to be prepared. Don't be caught without your gas mask. Don't be a casualty. Always wear your gas mask."
So everyone in Britain was given a mask, a horrible, smelly rubber face mask with little glass windows that get all steamed up. and the bottoms of the mask fill up with spit and sweat.
And they're in silly cardboard boxes that fall apart. So a lot of children fastened the mask to the end of a dog lead, threw them over their shoulders, and kids being kids came up with new ways to use their masks. It's amazing some kids didn't come up with a good scam for selling them. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gather round, see what I have here. Yes, mate, it may look like a gas mask to you, it may even look like a gas mask to me, but this is 1941 super toy. Just grab it by the strap, swing it round your head, and smash it against somebody else's super toy.
Oh, look at that.
So you can smash the other person's first. That's right, Sonny, a bit like conkers. Yes, little lady, I know. Girls don't play conkers in your school. Quite right, little lady. So, cradle the toy in your arms, paint a face on it, wrap a little blanket round, and what have you got? A dolly! Amazing! And you, young gentleman, I know you're going to say you're too young for conkers and dolls. Funny you should say that. But hold the super toy by the straps, fill the case with pencils, pens and bottles of ink, and there you have it. A pencil case. Amazing. And that's not all. No. You don't get elastic to make a catapult, do you, kids? No. Then use the rubber straps as a catapult. Fill it with ink pellets and ping them at your teacher. And lastly, you can place one super toy on the grass here and the other a couple of yards away. There. And what do we have? No, Sonny, not two gas masks on the grass. We have a pair of goal posts for football or hockey. Amazing! Cool.
One for me, please. I'll take one as well. One, mister.
So come on, get your gas masks here. Just £1/crown. Thank you, miss. Thank you, young sir. It's amazing how thick some people can be. Roll up, come on, £1/crown only, £1/crown. Well, World War II was a good time for some people. No sweets, no food, no petrol for cars. You could get petrol if you needed it for business, but there was a red dye in it to stop you selling it for a huge profit. So, you can use one of those gas masks to get rid of the dye. Pour the red petrol through the gas mask and it comes out clear. Just don't then wear the gas mask and light a cigarette or... (1942). Nearly everything is in short supply or on ration because of the war. But ruthless people find ways to beat the rationing system. There are many cases, like the one of the butcher who sold stewing steak to a restaurant. It turned out to be horse meat. He went to prison for 6 months. Unscrupulous farmers are selling sick cattle to butchers. Your motto should be, don't eat the sausages. Women are wearing shorter skirts again, and not because they're daring rebels, but because they don't have enough material for long ones. And boys are stuck in short trousers till they're 12. Chilly kneecaps. But some boys would be happy to hear soap was rationed. And you had to make a bar of soap last a month. And some scruffy lads made it last a year. The German army was defeated in Russia, so the war was turning against them. The blitzed Brits had hope that the war would end soon. Well, within 3 years, anyway. The Case of the Stolen Chocolate. Children in wartime Britain used to enjoy stories. So here's one told in the style of the time. It may be a story, but the facts behind it are true. Imagine a boy telling it in the early 1940s, when food was rationed and chocolate was a rare and precious treat. Once upon a time, in a school in the south of England, I discovered a mysterious box on my desk. I turned to my chum, Janet, and I said, "I say, Janet, I'm jolly hungry." She said, "I know. Cook dished up that awful dried egg again this morning. It's getting jolly boring." That's when I said, "But I say, Janet, what's this tin box doing on my desk?" "I don't know, Freddie, but I've got one too." We were always having spy scares and bomb scares, so I said, "Perhaps it's a bomb planted by an enemy spy. Shall we open it and see?" "Oh, gosh, no, look, it has a label on the lid," Janet said. I read it. "Do not open except in an emergency." What sort of emergency, I wonder? Janet said, "How odd. I wish I could look inside." And I said, "Oh, Sir would be furious. We don't want a 2-hour detention. We'd miss the school cricket match." Janet sighed. "It would almost be worth it to see what's inside." I said, "Quick, put it down. Sir is coming." That's when Sir walked into the room and said, "Good morning, 3A." "Good morning, sir." "And now, girls and boys, you're probably wondering what's inside those boxes on your desk." "Please, sir, yes, sir." "Well, I can tell you they are emergency rations. Your parents were asked to send them. If the enemy attacks and the kitchens are destroyed, then the food in the boxes will keep you going at least 2 days until help arrives. You must not open those boxes except in an emergency. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." I wanted to know, why is he looking at me? And Janet said, "Because everyone knows what a greedy little turnip you are." So I said, "Stop talking, you two. Now, Class 3A, open your books at page 37, The Origins of the French Revolution." The next day, I got a letter from Mum saying she'd sent the emergency box to me and she'd put in a box of Kit Kat chocolate. Oh, I wish she hadn't told me that. I said to Janet, "I have to have that Kit Kat, Janet. I'll die if I don't have a bite." And Janet said, "And you'll die if you do have a bite, and Sir catches you opening your box, Freddie. Don't do it." Please, sir. What was that? Please, sir, the bell. "Airy practice, right, class? Line up at the door. Let's see if we can beat last week's record of 2 minutes and 40 seconds to the air raid shelter, shall we? And don't forget those gas masks." I was halfway to the air raid shelter when I suddenly remembered something. "Oh, Lord, Janet, I've gone and forgotten my secret box. Sir will kill me. He'll make sure I miss the cricket match. I'm going back." "What are you doing back here, boy? You were sent to the air raid shelter. Disobedient child. Get out! Get out!" "Sorry, sir. I forgot my emergency box." "I have it here. Take it, but don't open it. Don't open it. And you can have 2 hours detention tonight." "I'll miss the cricket match, sir." "I know, and let that be a lesson to you." "Yes, sir." Well, we won the cricket that night anyway. So in the house when we were staying, we decided to celebrate with a midnight feast. Janet said, "I've a little dried egg and some mashed potato." And I said, "Yuck, I have a Kit Kat bar." "Oh, you can't open your emergency box." "Ah, but I can. If no one knows what was in it, then no one will know I've taken it out." So Janet said, "Oh, go on then, open the box." I gasped. "Crikey, my Kit Kat! Gone!" "Stolen," Janet said. "But who would do a thing like that?" "I think I know, Janet. I think I know." "You mean?" "Yes. It's only been out of my sight once, And when I went back to the classroom, it was in the hands of... Sir? And I know it was right. When I told the teacher about the stolen chocolate, then he turned a bright shade of red with shame. The teacher was a thief. Would you believe it? That's horrible history, isn't it? Evil evacuation. One way to save children from gas and bombs was to send them away to the countryside. The enemy bombers attacked the big towns like London, or the towns where the Brits made war machinery like Coventry, but they didn't waste bombs on villages and small towns, so the government made a plan to evacuate children to the countryside. Parents had the job of explaining to kids that they'd be staying away with some nice family in the country, but Mum wouldn't be coming with them. So most kids were worried.
Hey, but I've never been to the country before. There are all sorts of wild animals there. We might get attacked by cows and sheep. I've seen them in pictures at school. Or chased by chickens. Or, Mum, or battered by bulls. I'm scared, Mum.
Of course, a lot of children loved their stay in the countryside. But this is horrible history, so let's hear some of the true stories told by the children who didn't like being evacuated.
Dear Mum, please can I come home? Let me tell you about this place. It's even worse than Newcastle. The farm is 3 miles from the nearest village and I'm so lonely. The only water is cold water that the farmer's wife pumps up into the kitchen. And as for the toilet, it's down at the end of a long garden and it's just a hole in the ground with ashes at the bottom to soak up the poo. At night, I always go with the farmer's daughter. It's so scary. Spiders in the toilet. Horrible.
And it's not much fun for spiders either.
We feed the chickens every day, so I thought they were pets. I was so upset when the farmer grabbed one.
Come here, you.
And killed it. Then I watched them slaughtering the pig. I started to have nightmares. But they didn't care. The farmer just said, "This is our way of life, child. You're a simple spoilt brat, and you know nothing." And they have a farm worker. They give him dinner every night, but they won't let him sit at the same table as the family. It's like he's some sort of slave. And if anything goes wrong in the house, I always get the blame. The farmer's daughter gangs up against me. They tear up me books. And they rip the arms and legs off our Edie's doll. So please, Mum, can I come home?
But the parents didn't always understand how much the kids were suffering. "Dear Tom and Edie, I'm sure you'll be fine once you've settled in. I may get out to visit you sometime next year. That'll be nice, won't it? All my love to you both, from Mum."
Dear Mum, I thought I was badly off. But at school, I met an evacuee called Marjorie. She's even worse than me. She had terrible bruises on her arms and her legs, and I asked her, "How did you get those?" She said she'd been sent to stay with a woman called Mrs. Grant. She went with my little brother Kenny, and she was so strict. "Speak when you're spoken to, or I'll take a stick to you." Their mum and dad came to visit, but when they arrived, she just lied. "Oh, such a shame about those bruises. Yes, they got them playing in the fields. They can be a little rough, can't they? Safe journey home. Don't worry, your little darlings are in good hands." But when the front door closed, she turned all nasty again. "Now, you two little rats, trying to get me into trouble, would you? I'll show you what a beating really is. That'll teach you. Your parents live in a block of flats, don't they? Well, only criminals live in flats. Well, I know how to deal with criminals. Beat it out of them." She sold their sweet ration, and she gave them the most disgusting jobs. Made them pick up cigarette ends from the gutters so she can make her own cigarettes from them. She says they're prisoners, Mum. Prisoners. And worst of all, when Kenny and Marjorie went home, they found their mother and father hadn't even missed them. Then there were the saddest evacuees of all, the ones who got home after the war and found their parents had simply gone. Their parents abandoned them. Nearly 40,000 children were unclaimed after the war. But hang on, the evacuation wasn't all one-sided. The evacuees could be pretty awful kids to live with. You should hear some of the stories from the families that looked after them. Our evacuee's a terror. One day he started playing with some matches and he set fire to a chair. We had to redecorate after he left. I heard of one evacuee came dressed so shabbily, my mum bought him new clothes. He went home for the weekend and came back to us in more shabby clothes. His mum had taken the new clothes and sold them. And you couldn't get a knit comb in the whole of North Allerton. I'd sold out. The evacuees' heads are just crawling with lice. And our evacuee had never been fed anything but chips all his life. We gave him a fresh egg and he didn't know what to do with it. My mum sent our evacuee out shopping. He came back with the groceries and the money. He just shoplifted them the way his mum had taught him. Evacuees, they're just dirty little thieves. Like a lot of things in World War II, evacuation seemed like a good idea at the time, even though there was suffering on both sides. (1943). The first pop star is created in America. His name is Frank Sinatra. Meanwhile, clever Brit inventor Barnes Wallis invents a bomb that bounces. And the bombs destroy 3 dams in Germany's Ruhr Valley. The British have destroyed the dams! Dam! 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 They leak gallons of water. Meanwhile, in British pubs, they're selling gallons of water, except it's supposed to be beer. It's only half as strong as beer before the war, and you probably have to take your own glass to the pub. Oh, food shortages are getting bad. The trouble with Britain in World War II is it didn't grow enough food to feed itself. And it's an island, so extra food has to be brought in on ships. All the enemy has to do is sink our ships and starve the Brits to defeat. All the Brits have to do is eat less, and eat more of the food that we have plenty of that they don't get by sea, like potatoes. They were promoted by a wartime character, Potato Pete, and his potty poem about potatoes went, "Potatoes new, potatoes old, potatoes in a salad cold, potatoes baked or mashed or fried, potatoes whole, potatoes pied. Enjoy them all, including chips. Remember, spuds don't come in ships." So there were chips, but not much fish to go with them. Brit fishermen faced enemy submarines just to catch the fish, and the Navy needed those fishing boats to check for dangerous mines that could sink British battleships. So a poster declared, "The fishermen are saving lives by sweeping seas for mines. So you'll not grumble, what, no fish, when you have heard these lines." And whatever you did,
You had to make sure you didn't waste a scrap. Wasting food was against the law. Another propaganda poem went like this. Auntie threw her ham away. To the lockup she was taken. There she is, and there she'll stay till she learns to save her bacon. The Minister of Food, Lord Woolton, told people they shouldn't even peel potatoes, but eat the skins. Those who have the will to win cook potatoes in their skin, knowing that the sight of peelings deeply hurts Lord Woolton's feelings.
My feelings have been deeply hurt.
Lord Woolton also suggested they look for new types of meat, such as squirrels and crows. He gave out nice recipes for squirrel tail soup and bullock brain broth. And your little fluffy bunny pets would make tasty rabbit stew. Yummy!
Come on, give me that rabbit.
Hamburg Horror, a grim fairy tale. It wasn't just the Brits who suffered rationing and hunger in World War II. The Germans had the same problem. It led to some horribly historical tales going around. The story of the Hamburg Horror is a bit like a fairy tale, but some people swore it was true. The little girl limped down the bomb-ruined road, past the hollow houses and stepped carefully round the rubble. She was as thin as the rain that fell, and the soles of her shoes were thinner. She clutched a small loaf of black bread to her thin chest. It was growing dark, and she wanted to get home before the night fell and the rats came out. Even if they'd been working, the twisted lampposts would not be lit. She stopped. There was a soft, regular click coming from a side alley. She froze and turned her head slowly towards the noise. A man in a heavy army coat carried a white stick and was groping his way towards her. She stepped back, and a stone clattered at her feet. The man stopped, raised his white face and eyes covered by discs of dark glass. He said, "Is someone there?" The girl's mouth was dry. She licked her lips and spoke in a small voice. "Yes, sir." The man's worn face gave a small smile. "A young lady. What's your name?" "Gerda, sir." "Gerda. A lovely name. Gerda. Would you like to do something for the fatherland? Something to help us win this war? Stop the bombs falling each night and set us free?" Gerda stepped forward. "Oh, yes, sir." "Are you a true German?" "Yes, sir." "Then I can trust you with my secret," the man said. "I have a very secret message. It must be delivered now. But I am blind and weak. I need a nimble young person to run like the wind. Do you know Linden Street?" "Yes, sir." "There is a shoe shop at number 27. Go and tell the old cobbler that Hans sent you," the soldier said. He reached into the pocket of the great grey overcoat and pulled out a crumpled envelope. "And give him this. Whatever you do, you must not look in the envelope." "No, sir." "Good girl. Stop for no one, tell no one, trust no one. Now, run along before it gets dark." Gerda took the envelope, turned and ran through the empty streets, past the shattered ruin of her old school and the splintered stumps of the trees in the park. The grass was mostly mud, and her thin soles slipped as she sprinted across the park lawns. At the far side was the police station. An officer, pulling the blackout curtains across, watched her. Getting dark, she panted. Must deliver the letter and get home before it gets dark. Then she stopped so suddenly, her feet skidded on the cracked paving. She calmed herself, turned, and walked into the police station. The weary old man behind the counter looked at her through red-rimmed eyes. "Can I help?" he asked. And though his thick grey moustache bristled fiercely, his voice was kind. Gerda told her story. The policeman nodded. "I see," he nodded. "Suspicious." "That's what I thought," she cried. "I suddenly realised as I ran past here. How did he know it was getting dark if he was blind?" The man picked up a cloak and threw it over his shoulders. "I think I will take that note to number 27. It was later that night. As Gerda lay beneath a thin blanket and listened to the distant rumble of bombs, there was another rumble, someone knocking at the door. Her mother showed the policeman into the house, and Gerda sat up, wide-eyed to listen. He told her what had happened. "There is a cobbler shop at 27 Linden Street, run by an old man and his wife. When I went in with my uniform on, the couple looked very nervous. Now, all cobbler shops smell of sour old leather, but the smell in that shop was worse. The man made an excuse and went through to the back shop. I heard the back door open, then close, and realised he'd escaped. So I looked around the shop, and then I looked down in the cellar." "What was there?" Gerda asked, and clutched at her mother's shawl. "More horrors than I've seen in the whole of this terrible war," the policeman groaned. "There were bodies, dead bodies. Most were cut up and wrapped like joints of meat to be sold to hungry customers." Gerda's mother gasped. "I've heard of people eating human flesh." But Gerda had just one question. "What was in the letter?" The policeman passed it across to her. She unfolded the paper and read it. "Dear Jacob, this is the last one I shall be sending you today. Your friend Hans." Gerda felt faint and giddy. I was... The policeman nodded. "You were next." "1944. There are so many blood donations that there are some left over. Someone suggests that the spare blood could be used to make black puddings and help with the food shortages. The government thinks seriously about this before finally rejecting the idea. The 6th of June 1944 is D-Day. British and American troops land in northern France and head for Berlin, but they're still almost a year away. The 12th of June 1944, a new German secret weapon, a flying bomb, lands on London. It's called the V1, Vengeance Weapon. Within a month, almost 3,000 Brits will be killed by them. Some weapon, some vengeance. By September 1944, the new V2 rockets are landing on Britain. But there's a faint whiff of victory in the air. The Home Guard, Dad's army, is disbanded. No one's worried about a German invasion any longer. Spy catchers and spy scratchers. During World War II, there were posters all over the place. Careless talk costs lives and walls have ears. The messages meant the same. Beware, there are German spies everywhere. Some people took this message very seriously. Very, very seriously. And a group of public school boys in the south of England took it so seriously they suspected nearly everyone of being a spy. This led to a very unfortunate incident in one junior public school. The head teacher, Wesley Preparatory School, 2, Charles Williams, The Lodge, Broadstairs. Dear Mr. Williams, I am writing to tell you I've been forced to exclude your son, Headley, from Wesley School until such time as I receive a full explanation of his behaviour. Never in the history of this school has there been such a disgraceful attack upon a member of staff. Your son's assault upon Mr. Itchen, the Latin master, has left the whole staff deeply shocked. Your son's confused babbling about German spies makes no sense to us at all. The rest of the boys choose to remain silent on the incident. Until such time as you can explain the attack and guarantee that it will not happen again, I must ask you to keep your son at home. Yours sincerely, Jacob Barnsby, MSc, PhD. The boy attacks a teacher and calls him a spy. What on earth was going on? The father of Headley replied with an incredible but true explanation.
Dear Mr. Barnsby, thank you for your letter of the 13th of January. May I explain? I'm sure you are aware that this country is full of German spies. The fearful thing is that they speak perfect English and are masters of disguise. Anyone could be a German spy. The boys of the third form decided some action was needed to identify and arrest these spies before they did any harm. Of course, the boys had very little help in identifying spies. The boys just had one reliable guide, the Hotspur comic. This esteemed publication recently produced a story about a German spy, and the evil man was clearly pictured in the drawings. The boys recognised him at once. The spy in the pictures looked identical to Mr. Itchen, their Latin teacher. Then my son noticed something peculiar about Mr. Itchen. His skin. It is very pasty, almost like putty. He was convinced that it was a fiendish German mask. One of us must rip the mask from his face, my son suggested. I will do it, my brave little Headley said. Word got around that in the next Latin lesson, my gallant son would tackle the German spy, Herr von Itchen, as they began to call him. After lunch, without pausing to think of his own life, my little Headley leapt from the front row and dug his fingers into Mr. Itchen's face. Of course, he very quickly realised that this was in fact Mr. Itchen's face and not a mask. I can quite understand why Mr. Itchen felt it necessary to run out of the door, especially since there were 40 boys screaming "spy" at him. It is not really Mr. Itchen's fault that he looks so much like the spy in the Hotspur. It is not really little Headley's fault that he's so desperately keen to do the right thing for his country.
If you'll allow my son to return to school, I think we will promise he will never again attack a teacher until he has explained his suspicions to you first. My wife and I hope that Mr. Itchin is recovering from the attack. Please pass on our regrets and best wishes to him. Your humble servant, Barclay Williams, Esquire. In fact, the headmaster was so totally confused by what had happened that no one was punished. You're advised not to try this sort of thing in your own classroom, even if your teacher is as ugly as King Kong's uncle. It wasn't just public school boys who sniffed out German spies. A vicar's daughter ran up to a policeman and reported, "Batman! Batman! Arrest him! He must be a filthy Nazi spy!" And the policeman asked, "How can you tell?" And the girl said, "Because he went to the toilet and he didn't pull the chain." You can tell that girl was keen to flush out spies. "1945. The British and their allies are winning the war. No more blackout. 28th of April 1945, Italy's dictator Mussolini is tried. "Let me live, and I'll give you my empire," he begs. Fat chance, fat man. He's shot and hung up by the heels for the people to see. 2 days later, Adolf Hitler shoots himself because he doesn't want to end up a prisoner like Mussolini. And on the 6th of May, Germany surrenders. There are parties all over Britain for VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. But it's not the end of the war. On the other side of the world, the Japanese are fighting on. In Japan, 140,000 Japanese men, women and children were killed in Hiroshima. How? The Americans dropped a single atomic bomb on the town. They called the bomb Little Boy. Is that cute? Or is it sick? When a second bomb destroys Nagasaki 3 days later, the Japanese surrender. It's hard to fight an enemy when a single bomb can kill tens of thousands of people in a few seconds. The Americans dropping those atom bombs on Japan brings an end to the Second World War. 6 years and 40 million corpses after it started. Dreadful Dresden. The Blitz was awful, but don't forget, many German cities suffered just as much, especially in 1945 towards the end of the war. Reports like this one from Dresden make pretty horrible history listening. Yesterday's air raid on the city was the worst of the war. There were even more dreadful losses because it was a carnival day and so many children had gone to the circus. The first many were aware of the attack was when the loudspeakers made this announcement. The first waves of a large enemy bomber formation have changed course and are now approaching the city boundaries. There is going to be an attack. The population is instructed to proceed to one of the basements and cellars. The police have instructions to arrest all those who remain in the open. The first bombs fell at 10:13 p.m. and created a firestorm. This morning, long-range enemy fighters flew over the city and machine-gunned anyone who was out in the open. I was outside the cathedral and have to tell you it was a scene of utter carnage. An enemy plane flew over and shot at a children's choir. There are dozens of dead and wounded. The pilot was so low he must have known they were children and not our soldiers. It's quite dreadful. Inhuman. The main target was the central station. It was hit, but the rail services say trains will be running again this morning. So the raid that killed so many innocent people has been a failure. No one will ever know how many people died in the city over the past days, but some say it's as many as 135,000. That's today in Dresden, Germany. It's Ash Wednesday. Patriotic poetry. The great Brit hero of World War II was leader Winston Churchill. After the war, he said, "If the British Empire lasts 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest hour." 1946, and the music halls filled with people celebrating the end of the war. A popular recital was in praise of the people who helped Britain to win the war. One of the verses went like this: "Thank you. In this glorious hour of victory, when the world at last is free, free forever from the shackles of a hateful tyranny, in the midst of our rejoicing, let us pause a while and think of those to whom we owe so much, who brought us from the brink. Let us think of them today, and of our overwhelming debt, and say a simple thank you, lest we all too soon forget. And over all, forever shining in undying fame, we thank you, Winston Churchill. Blessed forever be your name." Which is curious, because in the election held after the war, the people voted to throw Winston Churchill's party out of government. Maybe they should have added a couple of extra lines. "We thank you, Winston Churchill, our champion in the fight. But now we've won, it's cheerio, goodbye, and nighty-night." Horrible Histories was written and read by me, Terry Deary, and produced by Mick Baker of Testbed Productions. Original music was by Dan Formaggio, and all the Horrible History books are published by Scholastic Children's Books.
Meh.